I just want you to tell me what you think put Diane in Haha House.
Well, I'm not a doctor, and even if I were, I couldn't discuss it with you.
For 40 years, Cheers looked like the perfect sitcom. Laughter, friendship, and a bar where everyone belonged. But now, at 70, Kelsey Grammer is finally telling the truth. And it's nothing like what we thought.
When did you first hear about the name Fraser Crane?
She said, Mandy Patinkin told me that you're a funny leading man type. I said, yeah, I guess he's right about that.
Hidden feuds, addiction, quiet grief, a beloved co-star passing mid-season, and shocking claims that someone on set tried to get him fired. What really happened behind the scenes of one of TV's most iconic shows? Once you hear what Grammer has to say, Cheers will never feel the same again. Let's go. Section 1. The Birth of a Bar. How Cheers began. It was supposed to be just another sitcom. A small bar. A few quirky regulars. Nothing flashy. But Cheers wasn't just another show. It was a gamble that nearly collapsed before it ever had a chance. In its first season, it was a ratings disaster. Out of 100 primetime shows, Cheers ranked 77th. That's not just low, that's practically canceled. And yet, somehow, this tiny, underperforming sitcom became one of the most beloved, enduring comedies in television history. So how did Cheers go from near failure to a cultural landmark? And more importantly, what did it cost to make it look so effortless? Why did Kelsey Grammer, after decades of silence, finally speak out at 70? And what was really happening behind the scenes while America laughed? The idea behind Cheers was deceptively simple. A show set almost entirely inside a neighborhood bar in Boston, where locals gathered to drink, talk, and feel seen. NBC greenlit it in 1982, taking a risk on creators James Burrows and brothers Glenn and Les Charles. These were writers who had cut their teeth on Taxi and MASH. They knew how to write about people, not just punchlines. But this time, they wanted something more grounded. No apartment complexes, no rotating cities, just one bar, one room, one community. And for it to work, every single character had to matter. At the center of that bar stood Sam Malone, played by Ted Danson, an ex-baseball player turned bartender with charm, confidence, and a serious allergy to commitment. Sam wasn't just the lead. He was the gravitational pull of the show. Opposite him was Shelley Long's Diane Chambers, a highly educated, snobbish waitress who stumbled into the bar after being dumped by her fiancé. Her presence immediately upended the entire atmosphere. She was academic. He was instinctual. She quoted Freud. He flirted with customers. Their constant arguments and undeniable chemistry formed the spine of the show's early seasons. Then there was Coach, played by Nicholas Colasanto, Sam's aging, kind-hearted, and somewhat dim-witted mentor behind the bar. Coach was more than comic relief. He brought emotional depth and a sense of old-school loyalty to the room. Rhea Perlman's Carla Tortelli added fire to the mix, sharp-tongued, street-smart, and pregnant more often than not. And no one could forget Norm and Cliff. Norm, the perpetually unemployed beer lover, made Norm a cultural catchphrase. Cliff, the trivia-phobied mailman, turned useless facts into a comedic art form. Together, these 6 characters built a bar that felt familiar even if you'd never stepped foot in Boston. But all the character chemistry in the world couldn't save the show at first. When it debuted in September of 1982, it was buried in the ratings. Critics liked it, sure, but viewers just weren't tuning in. Most networks would have axed it after that first season. NBC didn't. They saw something in the writing, the performances, the world it created, Instead of canceling Cheers, they shifted its time slot and doubled down on promotion. Slowly, viewers started to take notice. By its third season, Cheers had clawed its way into the top 10. By season 5, it was a juggernaut. Cheers wasn't just funny, it was smart. Its tight writing and one-room bottle set gave the bar a life of its own. Every joke revealed something deeper. On screen, it felt warm and effortless. But behind the scenes, things weren't so easy. By the second season, tensions were quietly rising, actors clashing with each other, writers under pressure, and cast members carrying personal pain into work. When Kelsey Grammer joined in season 3, he was welcomed by the audience, but not by everyone on set. Now, at 70, he's revealing just how deep that tension really ran. Section 2. The Truth at 70. Kelsey Grammer finally speaks. After nearly 4 decades of silence, Kelsey Grammer has finally spoken, and what he's revealed about Cheers is shocking. This is a man, now 70 years old, confirming long-rumored tensions behind the scenes. Addiction, isolation, power plays, and a truth that fans never saw coming. That while the audience laughed, he often wanted to disappear. Why did no one say anything sooner? Who tried to push him out of the show that made him famous? And why is he choosing to speak now? In his most recent memoir, and a string of candid interviews tied to its release, Grammer has started to open up in a way he never has before. The memoir, dedicated in part to his late sister and to his friend and co-star Kirstie Alley, does something rare in Hollywood. It admits to being broken. He writes plainly and without sensationalism, but the stories speak for themselves. He describes walking on to the Cheers set in 1984, still grieving the brutal passing of his younger sister Karen at the hands of a kidnapper 9 years prior. He was only 20 years old at the time of her death, and though his career was just starting to gain momentum, emotionally, he was stuck. That grief, he now admits, never left him. Instead, he buried it. He walked into the bar with a smile and left each night haunted. For years, Grammer says, he kept up appearances. He performed. He smiled on cue. But beneath the surface, he was unraveling. He began relying heavily on alcohol to numb himself, later describing it as a companion that followed him everywhere. What started as drinks after rehearsal slowly became drinks during rehearsal, and eventually a dependency that threatened his health, his career, and his reputation. In 1990, he was arrested for driving under the influence and possession of a highly illicit substance. The headlines were immediate. For many fans, it was the first crack in the illusion that Cheers was the happiest set on television. But now, Grammer is revealing what most people didn't know then, that he had been spiraling for years before that arrest. He confesses to showing up to set still intoxicated from the night before. He missed rehearsals. He lashed out privately. And yet, somehow, the show continued, and no one said anything publicly. In his words, everyone knew, but we were all just trying to survive. The producers, he claims, were supportive behind closed doors, but they also made it clear: get it together or you're done. It's a brutal admission, not only of personal failure, but of the strange silence that often surrounds addiction in high-pressure workplaces. On set, Cheers projected warmth and unity. Off-set, Grammer was falling apart. And while the cast maintained a united front for the public, there were divisions that ran deep, especially when it came to his growing role on the show. One of the most explosive revelations in Grammer's recent interviews concerns his relationship with Shelley Long, who played Diane Chambers. Fans have long speculated about behind-the-scenes tension between the two, especially as Grammer's character, Frasier Crane, became a central part of the show's storylines. At the time, Frasier was only meant to appear in a handful of episodes, but audience response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. The writers saw potential in Grammer's dry, intellectual, and awkward portrayal of the psychiatrist, and suddenly, he wasn't a guest character anymore. He was a permanent fixture. Grammer now claims that this rise did not sit well with everyone. He alleges that Shelley Long, in particular, was upset by how quickly Frasier became important to the show. According to him, she felt threatened. In his memoir, he writes that Long lobbied behind the scenes to have his character written off the show. She was concerned, he says, that his expanded role would undermine her place as a lead and shift the show's balance. He doesn't accuse her of malice, but he does suggest that her actions had real consequences. "I was made to feel like I didn't belong," he writes, "like I was intruding on something sacred." Whether or not Shelley Long truly tried to get him fired remains a matter of dispute. Producer Ken Levine, who worked closely with the cast and writers, has since denied this claim. In his own blog, Levine acknowledges that Long could be difficult, even exhausting, but says she never acted out of spite. Still, Grammer's perspective is clear. He felt unwelcome, and that feeling lingered for years. What makes these revelations even more powerful is the contrast they create with Grammer's memories of Kirstie Alley. When Shelley Long left the show in 1987, Alley stepped in as Rebecca Howe, and everything changed. The two actors bonded immediately. Grammer describes her as brilliant, loud, and full of love. They shared jokes, personal stories, and a mutual understanding of what it meant to feel like an outsider. Alley, too, was dealing with intense media scrutiny at the time, particularly related to her personal life and her association with Scientology. But on set, Grammer says, she was his anchor. When Alley passed away in 2022, Grammer paid public tribute to her, calling her radiant and a light in the darkest moments. In his memoir, he reflects on how her presence helped him feel safe on a set that had often felt cold. "She didn't care about power games," he writes. "She cared about people." That sense of loyalty extended to their off-screen friendship, which endured long after Cheers ended. What emerges from Grammer's recent honesty is a portrait of a man who was deeply shaped, both positively and negatively, by his time on Cheers. It made him famous. It gave him Frasier, a character he would play for 2 decades and win multiple Emmys for. But it also nearly destroyed him. The pressure to perform, the politics of the cast, and the unhealed trauma he carried into work every day. It all came at a cost. Section 3. Frasier wasn't supposed to stay, but he changed everything. When Kelsey Grammer first walked onto the Cheers set in 1984, no one expected him to stay. He was brought in as a narrative device, Diane Chambers' new boyfriend, designed to stir the pot in her endless back and forth with Sam Malone. His character, Dr. Frasier Crane, was the opposite of everyone else at the bar. Refined, uptight, painfully academic. In the original plan, he'd appear in just a few episodes, shake things up, and then leave quietly. So how did a character created as a temporary inconvenience become one of the defining voices of the series? And later, the face of one of the most successful spin-offs in television history. It all comes down to the performance. Grammer didn't play Frasier like a guest star trying to land laughs. He played him like a real person, deeply flawed, irritatingly pretentious, but oddly vulnerable. The character wasn't charming in the traditional sitcom sense. He quoted Freud when the rest of the bar was just trying to enjoy a drink. But there was something magnetic about that difference. Viewers didn't necessarily love him, but they couldn't forget him either. The writers noticed the shift almost immediately. The original idea was to create a wedge between Diane and Sam. But instead of just making Frasier the antagonist in a tired love triangle, they found themselves drawn to how he interacted with the rest of the bar. Frasier didn't belong there, and that's what made it work. He was an outsider trying desperately to fit in, constantly adjusting his vocabulary, his tone, even his posture, just to earn a seat at the table. And that struggle, to be respected, to be liked, made him funny, yes, but also oddly relatable. Within a few weeks, the audience response was undeniable. Focus groups noted his scenes as highlights. Fan mail started to arrive with questions about this strange, nervous psychiatrist. Ratings ticked up. And just like that, a character who was never supposed to last was written into the show's long-term arc. But not everyone was thrilled about it. As Grammer's screen time increased, so did quiet concerns among the rest of the cast. Cheers had been carefully built around 6 core characters, each with their own rhythm and comic energy. The show's strength had always come from its ensemble feel. No one was bigger than the room. But suddenly, a new voice was getting louder. According to Grammer, the unease was palpable. In interviews and in his recent memoir, he describes a growing sense of being watched, not with admiration, but with quiet suspicion. He didn't have the long history that the other actors did. He hadn't paid his dues in the early days when the show was nearly canceled. He hadn't earned their trust yet. And for some, that lack of shared history became a source of real tension. Grammer claims that Shelley Long, in particular, resisted his character's permanence. She had helped shape the show's identity in its earliest years, and Frasier's presence, in her eyes, pulled the story in a different direction, one that threatened to marginalize her own character's role. Grammer has gone as far as suggesting that Long pushed producers to phase him out, arguing that his presence undermined the emotional arc of Diane and Sam. There were no screaming matches or ultimatums, but he says the pressure was real. Ken Levine, one of the show's producers and head writers, has pushed back on that claim. In multiple blog posts and interviews, Levine insists that Long never once tried to have Grammer removed. He has admitted that Long could be difficult. She challenged scripts, asked questions no one else asked, and often slowed down production with her perfectionism. But he maintains that her pushback was always about improving the material, not protecting her own spotlight. So who's telling the full truth? Probably both of them, in their own ways. Grammer, walking into an already tight cast, likely felt isolated and exposed. Long, fiercely protective of the show's original tone, probably did view Frasier as a risk. And the tension between them, on and off-screen, added a strange realism to their interactions. Diane's frustration with Frasier never felt entirely like acting. What made Frasier work so well on Cheers was that he didn't belong there. The bar was filled with working-class energy, sarcasm, beer, blue-collar wisdom. Frasier, with his wine-tasting vocabulary and constant psychoanalysis, was a glitch in the system. But that contrast didn't alienate viewers. It made things funnier. Carla didn't understand half of what he said, and she let him know it. Cliff saw him as competition in the trivia department. Sam, whose street smarts always trumped book smarts, had no patience for Frasier's long-winded theories about human behavior. And Frasier, in turn, kept showing up, trying, failing, adjusting, and trying again. That friction became comedy gold, and it also laid the groundwork for something much bigger. Because behind the scenes, producers started to wonder, if Frasier works here, in a place where he doesn't fit, what happens when we build a world around him? The idea of a spin-off started taking shape quietly, even before Cheers ended. The writers saw that Frasier had something few sitcom characters did: layers. He was educated, but deeply insecure, confident, but desperate for approval. He was funny, but only because he was constantly overcompensating. In psychological terms, Frasier was a character built on defense mechanisms: projection, denial, repression. He was a man struggling to hold himself together. That's a rare thing in comedy. Of course, the Frasier spin-off wouldn't debut until 1993, the year Cheers ended. But the seeds were planted years earlier, during the very arguments and unease that Grammer now talks about publicly. The discomfort that came from adding Frasier to Cheers was also the spark that made him compelling. He wasn't written to make people laugh. He was written to make people uncomfortable. And then the laughter followed. Section 4. Behind the Laughs. The Real Pain on Set. Kelsey Grammer's smile was convincing, sure. He hit his marks, landed his lines, and made millions laugh. But if you watched closely, you could sometimes spot a flicker of something else: exhaustion, distance, or just plain sadness. It wasn't acting. It was the weight of a personal tragedy that had never gone away. In 1975, long before Cheers ever aired, Grammer's younger sister, Karen, was kidnapped and robbed of her life. She was only 18 years old. The details of her death were horrific. Kelsey was just 20 at the time, studying acting and trying to figure out his life. One phone call changed everything. Her death shattered his family and left a hole in him that never fully closed. In later interviews, Grammer has admitted that he never really healed from it. He just carried it forward. By the time he joined Cheers in 1984, Grammer was a professional actor with stage credentials and a steady paycheck. But emotionally, he was running on empty. He arrived on set with what he's since described as a quiet storm inside him. And that storm grew louder as the years passed. Publicly, he was gaining fame. Privately, he was unraveling. Alcohol became his escape, and soon after, a dependency. It was something he needed to show up on set the next morning and pretend everything was fine. But not everyone was fooled. Some of his Cheers castmates noticed the change. According to Grammer, there were mornings he arrived hungover or still drunk. He missed rehearsals. He skipped table reads. There were rumors, whispers among the crew that something was wrong, that he wasn't handling the pressure. But nothing was said publicly until 1990. That year, Grammer was arrested for driving under the influence and found to be in possession of a highly illicit substance. It was his wake-up call, and it came with consequences. He was sentenced to 30 days in jail. For the first time, his private struggles were on public display. Headlines painted him as another cautionary tale, a rising star with a drinking problem and a court date. What they didn't show was the years of pain that led to that moment. The arrest didn't derail Cheers, but it did shake the cast. Some were supportive, offering quiet empathy and standing by him. Others, according to Grammer, were frustrated. They'd worked hard to build a consistent rhythm on the show. His absences, delays, and unpredictability disrupted that. And not everyone had the patience for it. It's unclear whether any formal meetings were held or ultimatums issued, but Grammer has said that after the arrest, the message from the producers was clear. We want you here, but only if you take care of yourself. It was a moment of reckoning. In the years that followed, Grammer would continue to battle his demons, but he credits the structure of Cheers and the quiet compassion of some of his colleagues for helping him hold on. He has often spoken about how the show gave him a sense of purpose. The bar, the cast, the rhythm of production. It kept him tethered to something even when he felt like falling apart. But he also admits that it enabled him, because as long as the work was getting done and the show kept winning awards, no one was going to ask too many questions. And the awards did keep coming. By the early 90s, Cheers had become one of the most celebrated sitcoms in television history. It won Emmys. It topped ratings. It launched spin-offs. But behind the scenes, some cast members were carrying far more than scripts and costumes. They were carrying trauma, addiction, burnout, and the crushing pressure of constant visibility. The show's filming schedule was relentless. Multi-camera sitcoms in front of live audiences demand precision and stamina. Scripts changed at the last minute. Jokes were rewritten on the fly. Rehearsals ran late, and after the lights went off, the pressure didn't ease. There were talk show appearances, press junkets, and constant scrutiny. Every weight gain, every missed cue, every awkward interview was subject to public dissection. And in the late 80s and early 90s, there was little understanding or space for mental health. You pushed through, you smiled, or you were labeled difficult. Grammer has since described the Cheers set as a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was a lifeline. It gave him a schedule, a community, and moments of joy. On the other, it masked the depth of his pain, because everyone around him was performing too. They were laughing on cue, hitting beats, and carrying their own invisible burdens. There was no time or space for personal collapse. You saved that for when you got home. He's also been candid about the fact that no one, not even the people closest to him, knew the full extent of what he was going through. Part of that was self-preservation. Part of it was shame. When you're the guy who makes people laugh, admitting that you want to disappear doesn't come easily. And so, like many in Hollywood, he wore the mask until it nearly destroyed him. But the silence didn't last forever. Years after Cheers ended, Grammer began speaking more openly about his struggles. He's talked about his sister, about the violence that tore through his life, about how acting became a shield and a wound, and how even the most successful show in television couldn't make him feel whole. By sharing that now, he's offering a rare, unfiltered view of what it really means to survive, not just in Hollywood, but in life. Section 5. Death of a cast member. Saying goodbye to Coach. On Cheers, Ernie Coach Pantuso was the aging former baseball coach turned bartender who forgot names, repeated himself, and loved every single customer who walked through the door. Off-screen, Nicholas Colasanto, who played him, was exactly what you hoped he'd be. Quiet, humble, kind. But behind that calm demeanor was a man quietly fighting a battle that few on set fully understood. Nicholas Colasanto had been in the business for decades by the time he joined Cheers. He wasn't a newcomer looking for a breakout role. He was a seasoned actor and director who had worked on dozens of television shows since the 1950s. Before landing the part of Coach, he had directed episodes of Starsky and Hutch, Chips, and Columbo. He was respected, experienced, and beloved by the crews he worked with. But Cheers gave him something different. Not just a job, but a character that became part of American pop culture almost overnight. Coach wasn't designed to be the show's emotional anchor. In fact, early character notes described him as a sidekick, someone to fill space behind the bar and lob the occasional one-liner. But Colasanto brought something unexpected to the role. He slowed the pace down. He reacted in real time. And instead of playing Coach as a clown, he played him as someone who'd lived a full life, who had lost, who had learned, and who loved being around people. Viewers connected to that warmth immediately. And so did the cast. For Ted Danson, Colasanto became a kind of father figure, on screen and off. Their dynamic mirrored their characters. Danson's Sam was fast-talking and impulsive, while Colasanto's Coach brought steadiness and heart. They worked in rhythm, but it was more than performance. Danson has said in interviews that Colasanto's presence helped ground him, especially in the chaos of early fame. For Kelsey Grammer, who joined during the third season, Colasanto represented stability. As Grammer battled his own grief and addiction behind the scenes, he looked to Colasanto as someone who had endured his own hardships with dignity. But even in those early days, Colasanto's health was failing. He had suffered from heart disease for years. Cast and crew knew he had trouble remembering lines, not because of age or inexperience, but because his health was declining. There were moments when he needed oxygen off stage. Moments when he pushed through pain just to finish a scene. But he kept showing up. He never complained, and he never asked for sympathy. During season 3, things got worse. Colasanto began missing episodes. At first, the writers worked around it, giving him lighter scenes or writing him out temporarily. But it soon became clear that his condition was serious. In early 1985, just as the cast was preparing to film another episode, news came that Nicholas Colasanto had died of a heart attack. He was 61 years old. The shock was immediate and devastating. This was the loss of someone who had become a quiet cornerstone of the show's energy. For the rest of the season, there was a noticeable heaviness on set. The audience didn't see all of it, but the grief was there, in the timing, in the dialogue, and in the spaces where Coach used to stand. The producers had a choice to make: recast the role or write him out. In television, recasting is common. It's efficient. It keeps scripts intact. But with Coach, it didn't feel right. Colasanto hadn't just played a part. He had created a presence that couldn't be replicated. Replacing him would have felt like pretending he hadn't mattered. So, they didn't. They let Coach go. His absence was addressed with respect and subtlety. In real life, the cast and crew kept a reminder of him close. On the wall of the Cheers set, behind the bar, hung a framed photo of Geronimo, an Apache warrior whose image Colasanto had kept in his dressing room for good luck. After his death, the cast placed it on the set as a tribute. It remained there for the rest of the series, visible in dozens of scenes. For insiders, it was more than a prop. It was a sign that Nick was still part of the room. But how do you replace someone like that on a show built around ensemble energy? The answer came in the form of Woody Harrelson, a then unknown actor from Texas who was cast as Woody Boyd, a young, naive bartender from Indiana. Harrelson didn't try to mimic Coach. He didn't replicate the rhythm or tone. Instead, the writers crafted a character that felt entirely new. Woody was cheerful, wide-eyed, and clumsy, in a way that balanced the group without feeling like a carbon copy. His arrival helped the show pivot, bringing in fresh energy while respecting what had been lost. Harrelson's casting was a risk. Introducing a new character so soon after a beloved actor's death could have gone poorly. But audiences responded. His chemistry with the cast, especially with Norm, Cliff, and Carla, was immediate. And over time, Woody became a fan favorite in his own right. But even as he carved out his place, the memory of Coach lingered. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.